For years, not wearing your seatbelt in this country has genuinely been one of the cheapest mistakes you could make behind the wheel. A fine, and nothing else. No points, no lasting mark on your license at all. That's about to change, and the shift is bigger than most drivers realize. Let's break down exactly what's being proposed, where it actually stands right now, and why treating this as old news could genuinely cost you your license sooner than you'd expect. Right now, today, the law on seatbelts hasn't actually changed yet, and I want to be completely upfront about that before anything else, because a lot of coverage on this topic has jumped ahead of where things genuinely stand, presenting a proposal as if it were already settled law. Currently, being caught without a seatbelt on, whether that's you as the driver or a passenger, carries a fixed penalty notice, typically around £100 if dealt with on the spot, rising to as much as £500 if the case goes to court. What it does not carry, and hasn't carried for as long as most drivers can remember, is a single penalty point. It's what's called a non-endorsable offense, meaning your license itself stays completely untouched, regardless of how many times you're caught. That's the exact gap the government is now moving to close. As part of a new road safety strategy published by the Department for Transport, officials have proposed making seatbelt non-compliance an endorsable offense for the first time, carrying 3 penalty points on top of the existing financial penalty. The Transport Secretary has been direct about the reasoning behind it, framing every death on the roads as a tragedy that devastates families, and the data behind this particular proposal is genuinely stark. Despite seatbelt compliance sitting above 98% among car drivers nationally, more than 1 in 4 people killed in cars in recent years simply weren't wearing one. Over 200 deaths in a single reporting period alone. Seatbelts reduce the risk of death for drivers and front seat occupants by roughly 45%, and cut serious injury risk by around half, which is exactly why campaigners have been pushing for points to be added to the penalty for years, arguing that a fine alone lets habitual non-wearers simply pay and repeat the behavior indefinitely with zero further consequence. Here's where the honesty matters most, because this is genuinely still moving through the process rather than sitting on the statute book already. The formal consultation covering this proposal, alongside related measures on drink driving limits, uninsured drivers, and MOT enforcement, ran from the 7th of January this year until the 11th of May, drawing responses from hundreds of thousands of individual drivers, road safety organizations, police forces, and motoring groups. That consultation has now closed, and the government is in the process of reviewing that feedback and working out exactly how to translate it into actual legislation, with any formal change expected to land sometime across the remainder of this year and into next. If you've seen content suggesting 3 points are already being issued at the roadside today, that's ahead of where the law genuinely stands, though the direction of travel is about as clear as any proposal in this entire strategy. It's worth understanding exactly how this ties into a much bigger legislative package, because seatbelts aren't the only offense under review here. The same consultation covers a potential reduction of the drink-drive limit in England and Wales, currently sitting at 80 milligrams of alcohol per 100 milliliters of blood, down toward the 50 milligram limit already in force in Scotland, with an even stricter near-zero threshold proposed specifically for newly qualified drivers. It also covers whether driving without a valid MOT certificate should shift from a fine-only offense to one carrying penalty points too, a change that would affect an estimated 1.4 million drivers who, according to DVLA data, were at some point operating a vehicle with either a lapsed MOT or no valid insurance during a single recent year. Seatbelts sit alongside these as one strand of what officials are calling the most significant overhaul of motoring penalties since the Road Safety Act of 2006. Let's talk about what the proposal would actually mean in practice if it does land as expected, because the consequences run further than a simple 3-point addition might suggest on its own. Points from a seatbelt offense would sit on your license for the standard period, contributing directly to the totting up procedure the same way points from speeding or mobile phone use already do. If you're already carrying points from previous offenses, a single seatbelt violation could genuinely be the addition that pushes your total to 12, triggering a mandatory minimum 6-month driving ban, regardless of how relatively minor the seatbelt offense felt in isolation. For a driver sitting on 9 or 10 points already, this single proposed change turns a habit that currently costs £100 into something that could end their ability to drive at all. There's a detail in how this is being framed for younger passengers specifically that's worth knowing if you regularly drive with children or teenagers in the car. Responsibility for anyone under 14 sits with the driver, meaning if a young child isn't properly restrained, it's the driver facing the consequence, not the child. For anyone 14 and over, responsibility shifts to the individual passenger themselves, though a driver knowingly allowing a journey to continue with an unbuckled older passenger could still face scrutiny depending on the exact circumstances. It's also worth remembering that seatbelt warning systems vary enormously between vehicles. Newer cars typically alert you clearly the moment you move off unbuckled, while older vehicles often have no warning system at all, which is precisely the gap this proposal is aiming to close through consequence, rather than relying purely on in-car technology to catch every instance. Enforcement is the other side of this worth understanding, because catching seatbelt non-compliance has become considerably easier for police than it used to be. AI-enabled camera systems, the same broader family of technology behind average speed enforcement and mobile phone detection, are increasingly capable of identifying an unbelted driver or passenger from a still image as a vehicle passes, without an officer needing to physically observe it happening in real time. Combine that expanding camera capability with a proposal that finally adds points to the penalty, and the entire calculation around seatbelt compliance shifts considerably for anyone who's treated it as a minor, easily absorbed cost up to now. It's a similar pattern to what we've covered with other offenses too. The underlying rule doesn't necessarily change overnight, but the odds of actually being caught breaking it climb steadily as camera technology improves, meaning a habit that felt statistically low risk a few years ago carries meaningfully more exposure today than it did back then. It's worth being clear about the exemptions too, because they haven't been removed as part of any of this. Only the burden of demonstrating them has reportedly shifted somewhat more onto the driver under the proposed framework. Genuine medical exemptions still exist, as do specific provisions for certain trade vehicles making frequent stops and reversing. If you hold a valid medical exemption certificate, that protection remains, though it's worth keeping documentation readily accessible in the vehicle, rather than assuming a verbal explanation at the roadside will be sufficient if a stricter enforcement environment does land. It's worth comparing this proposed shift to how Northern Ireland already handles seatbelt offences, because it genuinely offers a preview of what England, Scotland, and Wales could be moving toward. The offence has long been endorsable in Northern Ireland, meaning drivers there already face points on their license, not just a fine, and that includes specific responsibility for ensuring a child in the front or rear seat is properly restrained. That distinction between how the same offense is treated across different parts of the UK has been raised repeatedly by road safety campaigners as an argument for consistency, pointing out that a genuinely dangerous behavior shouldn't carry meaningfully different consequences depending purely on which side of a regional border you happen to be driving. There's also a broader financial dimension worth understanding beyond the points themselves. Once an offense becomes endorsable, it doesn't just sit quietly on your license. It becomes visible to insurers at renewal, and insurers price risk based partly on exactly this kind of history. A seatbelt endorsement, even a single one, is the kind of entry that can nudge your premium upward at your next renewal, on top of whatever direct fine you paid at the time. For a driver who's treated the current fine as the full extent of the consequence, this additional layer, a genuinely more expensive insurance quote for years afterward, is easy to overlook until it's the reason a renewal quote comes back noticeably higher than expected. So let's bring this together into something you can actually act on today, rather than waiting for a headline confirming the change has landed. The current position is that seatbelt non-compliance still carries a fine only, no points. But that gap is very likely closing, with the consultation already closed and legislation expected to follow through the remainder of this year. If you're the kind of driver who's treated a seatbelt as optional for short journeys, particularly if you're already sitting on points from other offenses, this is genuinely worth changing now, rather than waiting to be caught by a rule that's already been signaled this clearly. If you regularly drive with children or teenagers, get in the habit of visually confirming everyone's belted before moving off, rather than relying purely on a dashboard warning light that older vehicles may not even have. And if you do hold a genuine medical exemption, keep the documentation in the car rather than assuming it'll never come up. It's also worth thinking about this proposal in the context of the totting up system as a whole, because the risk here isn't evenly spread across all drivers. Someone with a completely clean license facing a first seatbelt offense would simply pick up 3 points and carry on largely unaffected day to day. But UK licensing data has consistently shown a meaningful proportion of drivers sitting somewhere between 6 and 11 points at any given time, often accumulated gradually through relatively minor individual offenses over several years. For that specific group, this single proposed change represents a genuinely new category of risk, an offense that previously carried zero chance of pushing them toward a ban, now carrying real weight toward exactly that outcome. If you're unsure how many points you're currently carrying, checking through your DVLA account takes only a couple of minutes and is worth doing before assuming a seatbelt slip would be inconsequential for your specific situation. None of this is designed to alarm anyone who already buckles up as a matter of habit, which remains the overwhelming majority of UK drivers. But for the minority who've treated a seatbelt fine as a manageable occasional cost of convenience, the entire economics of that decision are about to change considerably, from a fine you can absorb to points that follow you for years and genuinely threaten your license if you're already carrying any from elsewhere. It's worth ending on why this particular proposal has drawn as much attention as it has within the wider strategy, because seatbelts sit in an unusual category compared to most of the other offenses under review. Unlike speeding or mobile phone use, wearing a seatbelt costs nothing, takes a couple of seconds, and requires no skill or judgment whatsoever, which is exactly why campaigners have found the current fine-only system so difficult to defend. A driver who occasionally exceeds a speed limit might reasonably argue about the specific circumstances of a given moment. There's very little equivalent argument available for choosing not to click a belt into place, which is part of why this specific measure has attracted such broad support across road safety organizations, insurers, and even some sections of the motoring industry that have historically pushed back against tougher enforcement elsewhere in the strategy. If this helped you understand exactly where this proposal stands and what it'll mean once it lands, hit subscribe, because I'll be covering the moment this becomes confirmed law, along with the drink drive and MOT changes sitting right alongside it in the same strategy. These proposals tend to move in clusters rather than arriving one at a time, so staying ahead of the whole package is genuinely more useful than tracking any single measure in isolation. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.